The building type and space type settings are very important in the calculation of heating and cooling loads and running an energy analysis. To access these settings, on the Manage ribbon, in the Settings panel, expand the MEP Settings drop-down and select Building Space Type Settings. Revit opens the Building Space Type Settings dialog. There are two radio buttons at the top, Building Type and Space Type. With Building Type selected, the available building types appear in the list on the left. With Space Type selected, the available space types appear. Then, with any type selected in the list, the available parameters appear in the panel on the right. The available parameters for building type and space type are based on ASHRAE standards. Let's start by looking at the building types. There are several building types, such as hospital or healthcare, office, school or university, and so on. For each building type, you can control parameters such as area per person, heat gain per person, lighting load density, power load density, schedules, and so on. When you select space type, the list populates with the various space types, such as dining area, lobby, office enclosed, and so on. The parameters are the same except opening time, closing time, and unoccupied cooling set point are not available for spaces. Recall that these parameters are based on ASHRAE standards, but you can modify them as you see necessary. If you are satisfied with these settings, you can use them in the project. I'll click OK to close the dialog. The building type for the project can be controlled in both the Heating and Cooling Loads dialog and the Energy Settings dialog. For example, I'll switch to the Analyze ribbon and click Energy Settings from the Energy Analysis panel. The first parameter in the Energy Settings dialog is Building Type. When I click in this field and expand the drop-down, you can see all of the building types that were available in the Building Space Type Settings dialog. I'll leave this set to Office and click OK. Now, when I click Heating and Cooling Loads on the Reports and Schedules panel, Revit displays the Heating and Cooling Loads dialog. On the General tab, the first parameter is Building Type, and the value can be changed here as well. You can also control the space type for each space in this dialog. To do this, switch to the Details tab. With the Space Radio button selected, the spaces are organized in a tree structure into the zones in which they were assigned. You can expand a zone to see the spaces assigned to that zone. Then, you can use the Control or Shift keys to select multiple spaces. With spaces selected, the space type parameter becomes available. By default, each space uses the parameters listed in the building type settings. To change the space type, click the button next to this field on the right. This opens the Space Type Settings dialog, and you can select one of the available space types in the list. Since I have multiple offices selected, I'll scroll down and select Office Enclosed, and then click OK. Now the space type for those spaces has updated. Also, pay attention to the People and Electrical Loads parameters. These parameters are currently referencing the parameters controlled by the space type. For example, when I click the button next to People, the People dialog appears. Here, you can control the occupancy and heat gain per person. Currently, each of the values is set to default, and as you can see, they match the values from the space type settings. You can expand the drop-down and choose Specified if you want to override the value for a single space. I'll click Cancel to close the dialog. When I click the button next to Electrical Loads, the Electrical Loads dialog appears. Here, you can control the lighting and power loads. Once again, these values are controlled by the space type settings, but you can override them for a single space. I'll click Cancel to close this dialog. As you can see, Revit provides you with flexibility when controlling parameters that affect heating and cooling loads. You can control every space using a building type, or multiple spaces using a space type, and you can still override specific parameters on a space-by-space basis. I'll click Save Settings to save the settings and close the dialog. Lastly, let's take a look at the instance properties for a space. I'll switch to the Level 1 floor plan view. Then I'll zoom in and select Office 1. In the Properties palette, I'll scroll down to the Energy Analysis section. Here, you can see the space type parameter that we modified in the Heating and Cooling Loads dialog. If I click in this field and click the button that appears, Revit opens the Space Type Settings dialog. If needed, I could change the space type or modify a parameter. Realize that if you change a parameter in this dialog, it will update for all spaces of that space type. I'll click Cancel to close the dialog. Be aware that you can access the People dialog and Electrical Loads dialog by clicking their respective edit buttons here in the Properties palette. Once again, by default, these parameters will reference the parameters specified in the space type settings, but you can override them for a single space if needed. For example, this may be the boss's corner office and you know that a mini fridge will be installed in this office. Therefore, the power load will be much greater in this office than all the other offices.